I'm really surprised that there aren't more Class 3 software AI medical devices out there, because for decades, people have been saying AI is going to replace doctors. And the only way AI is going to replace doctors is if it's Class 3 and highly regulated. How did we get from a pharmaceutical industry that was apothecaries making lotions and potions and selling snake oil out of wheelbarrows and merchant stalls? How did we get from there to a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry? The same thing is going to happen with medtech. We're going to end up with huge monopoly health tech organizations who will be pumping out Class 3 algorithms and running hospitals with regulated AI systems. And I think it's fantastic to see people experimenting with technologies. And just to be clear, if you make a chatbot which you use yourself, that's not a regulated medical device. You're not putting it on market, you're not selling it to anyone. It's when you start selling it and making claims that the regulators will step in.
Hey everybody, with me this week I have, repeat guest Hugh Harvey. Actually, mate, I was going to tell you, I looked at our metrics of our last episodes. They remain, I would say, top 10, even 5% of most downloaded episodes. So you're doing something right, whether that's obviously how non-controversial and balanced you are at all times, or whether it's just your level of expertise and regulatory that people love listening to. I don't know what it is, but people love listening to you, man. So welcome back. Looking forward to another one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do wonder why that is. All I try and do is talk truth to power and tell people what they need to do in order to succeed in health tech, and hopefully that chimes and resonates. Yeah, excited to be back. I think, is this the third one?
I think it's the third. Yeah, it is the third. There's definitely two that I saw in the previous. But one thing I think is interesting in my world, we'll obviously talk about AI in health tech and that side of things, but obviously AI in the content world has just flooded. It's flooded X, it's flooded Blue Sky, it's flooded LinkedIn with generic nonsense. And so content that is hyper relevant, hyper specific, emotive, let's just say, for example, specifically tweets at people and calls them out for poor regulatory compliance, has massive cut through and entertainment value. So actually, you've been onto something for quite a while. This is actually a type of content that AI cannot possibly deliver or displace you from. So actually, this has been an incredible content strategy for so many reasons. And I imagine one that you're going to keep doing, right? Because it's definitely purpose-driven.
I wouldn't call it a strategy. It's just the way I function. If I see someone doing something, let's say, legally dubious, I will say, maybe we should consider what the law says. I don't really have a strategy about it. I tell you what, I don't like kind of feeling like I'm self-advertising when I make posts. I want to give value and tell people interesting things that are happening that are uniquely relevant. I know that people follow me for specific reasons, and that they're interested in AI, they're interested in the regulatory side of things. And so am I. I have found my deep passion in life. I think the Japanese call it the ikigai.
The ikigai, yeah.
That's that correctly. But I found something that I'm deeply passionate and interested and good at, and love spending the time on it. And if I can communicate and provide clarity and insight around that, then that's a bonus, I suppose. But yeah, I wouldn't really call it a targeted strategy. But yeah, I can guarantee I do not use AI to write any of my posts.
It would be particularly clever AI to be able to do that, although I'm sure it's coming. Mate, what a time to be in the regulatory side of health tech. It's gone a bit bananas since even we last spoke. I guess on the positive side, you've got things like skin analytics, class 3, AI, diagnosis. You sort of cringe at using that word next to AI. But they have class 3 now. I spoke to Neil on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, all about that. But on the other side, we've got things like patients vibe coding their own anxiety apps and smashing it on Reddit. There's a lot. So I know one of the things you wanted to talk about was what you've called the maturity of the sector. So where the heck are we, and where are we going, and what's going on? It's all over the place.
It's a really fascinating time to be alive in the world of medical AI. And look, who would have thought the regulations would be central to it all a few years ago? And not me, no. I like to think I kind of saw this coming, which is why I built a business around this. But without trying to sound too self-triumphant, regulations are core to everything that we do in medicine, and I think people are starting to slowly get that message. And I think let's go to the example, skin analytics. I think this is an example of regulatory excellence. Getting a class 3 is no small feat, so congratulations to them. They are allowed to now claim that their AI can, with I believe it's 99% plus accuracy, triage normal skin lesions. So basically, if you take a photo, I believe they send like a little kit, like an iPhone with a little dermatoscope attachment on it. They send that to you. You take the photos of your mole or your skin lesion, you upload it, and the AI says you don't need to see a doctor. And they're allowed to do that. And that is a class 3 regulated function. And I'm really surprised that there aren't more class 3 software AI medical devices out there, because for decades, people have been saying AI is going to replace doctors. And the only way AI is going to replace doctors is if it's class 3 and highly regulated, because class 3 means two things. Either the condition that you're dealing with can lead to death or serious irreversible harm to the patient, or it's fully autonomous. There's no human in the loop. So it is actually actively doing the diagnosis or doing the treatment. That's what class 3 means. And that is the dream for AI. I would love it if we could get there. But the sector is so immature at the moment. People are, well, for a few years, we're going just for class 1s. So class 1 basically means you can't really do anything important. Class 2 means you can be clinical decision support, so you can assist, but there's a human overriding everything that the AI outputs. Class 3 provides that level of autonomy. That is the future. When you see the tech bros talk about, oh, AI is going to replace doctors, they are talking about multiple class 3 regulatory approvals. And that is what I'm really excited about. And that's exactly the kind of companies and the teams that we want to help come to market.
So why aren't there more class 3s? Is this people have a nice idea of a Star Trek type gadget, and then they look at it and go, well, actually, it's going to take a load of money to build. Fine, okay, we'll raise some money. And then, now it's going to take a load of even more money to get it regulated, which means that now we need to sell it everywhere. And this is my hunch, this is my bias, that like the actual costs to get something to market that you can sell means that you need such a high level of scale that actually it starts to become this really big moonshot, like really, really sort of, if it works, great, but if not, it will collapse. And, you've seen Babylon or rest of it. Like, is it that? Is it something else?
I think it's a combination of multiple factors. I think you're right in that there has to be a economic argument for doing it. So you have to have a total addressable market that is large enough for you to put that upfront investment and cost in. I think the other thing is finding that use case, something that can be automated and can actually show that super high level of accuracy. 99% is an incredibly accurate model for an AI system. So I think it's a clinical challenge, it's an economic challenge. But once you identify that and you've got an idea that economically is viable, actually the regulatory cost of a class 3 compared to a class 2A, which is what lots of people are going for, is not that significant.
Oh, really?
No. So a class 3, in essence, just means you have slightly more scrutiny around your clinical evidence. You can't get away with pushing it all into the post-market surveillance realm like you can necessarily with a class 2 device. You're more likely going to...
Just explain that a second.
So for class 2 devices, you can show that you work really well in kind of a bench testing environment.
Yeah.
So, go back to my experience in radiology tools. I've helped see countless radiology AI devices, all class 2A or 2B. You can essentially show that retrospectively, these things are incredibly accurate when compared to human readers. So you do what are called MRMC studies, multi-reader, multi-case studies. You get 100, 1,000 cases. You ask the AI to read them all. Then you ask humans to read them all. And then you compare the humans and the AI. And you can get regulatory clearance based on that. With a class 3, you have to do it prospective and say, actually, in the real world, when the human plus the AI or the AI without the human is performing, this is what the levels of performance and what the levels of risk are. And so it's slightly more costly in terms of the clinical trial, but the regulatory documentation is exactly the same. Exactly. You need quality management system, risk
Right.
management, population control. It's the same thing. So it's actually not that much more expensive in terms of the technical regulatory side of things. It's more on the clinical evidence generation. But people are scared of this because you have to do a proper clinical study. You have to put that funding in and do that. And clinical studies, by their nature, take time. The fastest I've seen them get done is 6 months, but that's incredibly quick.
Yeah.
So I think when I talk about the maturity of the sector, it's about thinking, well, look, how did we get from a pharmaceutical industry that was apothecaries making lotions and potions and selling snake oil out of wheelbarrows and merchant stalls? How did we get from there to a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry? The same thing is going to happen with medtech. We are currently just past the snake oil phase, I think, in medical AI, where there are thousands of regulated products on the market. But I actually think we're going to end up with huge monopoly health tech organizations who will be pumping out class 3 algorithms and running hospitals with regulated AI systems. And I think that's the future that will enable almost full autonomy within healthcare.
Explain that structure to me of that world then. So you said there'll be these big incumbents that are pumping out class 3 software as a medical device and all the rest of it. Like what? Just explain that world. Are they going to be attached to a hospital? So the hospital's going to share real-time data. That's just going to be there. They're going to have some function that then just uses all that data to pump. Like what does this world look like?
I mean, it doesn't exist, so we can only imagine. But I would think just like pharma have absolutely massively strong ties with hospitals and healthcare institutions. The same thing will happen with big medtech companies, and I'm talking like the size of Meta and Google and Microsoft.
Wow. Okay.
These kind of companies building out vast amounts of medical technology. They will have implicit in all of their software design development regulatory functions. So everything will be done under a quality management system as it has to be done. And they will have clinical research teams, they'll have regulatory science teams, and they will be pumping out these algorithms. And they'll be testing them in the hospitals they have partnerships with. And the ones that show promise will go on to further phases of studies, just like drugs do. And eventually they'll be regulated, approved, and they'll be sold on market. And they will be used worldwide. And that's the kind of the maturity of the sector I think we will get to in the next 100 years. And we have already started heading towards that journey.
So what becomes the most valuable thing now then? So for entrepreneurs, for health tech companies, is it the data? Is it the partnerships? Is it the relationship? Like what's the most valuable thing now, do you think, for the organizations if they're thinking about being a big player in that future world?
So I guess you'd have to decompose that world into the foundational components and what it takes. And I think you're absolutely right to say that one of them will be access to data. And it's going to have to be a fire hose of data. It's going to have to be deeply integrated within multiple hospital sites, ideally around the world. Because if you're going to go for these really high risk class 3 regulatory approvals, to cutting it, you're going to want data in multiple populations so you can get regulatory clearance in all jurisdictions. So data is, people have been saying it's the new oil, but I think labeled, de-anonymized, de-identified global healthcare data will be incredibly valuable. In fact, it already is. So data will be number one. The second foundational block is going to have to be a mature in-house regulatory system, and you cannot save on that. If you look at big pharma companies, their regulatory departments are huge, absolutely massive. Like it's 20% of their overhead. Like it's huge. So the same is going to have to go for health tech. So you're going to have, software engineers working under quality management systems with regulatory support at scale. So that's the second thing. The third thing is health economics. So all of these pharma companies have massive health economic departments arguing the pricing point for the reimbursement of their technologies. They're identifying markets. So the way that it works in pharma is they'll identify a compound, and before they even go to trials, they will do full health economic modeling to say, if this works, what level of cure rate or what level of success do we need to see to make this profitable? The same thing will happen with algorithms as well. So I think those are three foundation blocks that I think will kind of spearhead this new revolution.
One thing that is happening on the other side of the table is, whilst we are definitely seeing that maturing on the, I almost want to call it like the B2B side, or the the side where people are looking for regulated devices or looking to get devices regulated in order to sell them and build businesses. The other thing with the way that the world has gone is that patients themselves are now completely empowered to design and build things themselves. And you and I are both clinicians, man. Like we have this like inherent and very visceral reaction whenever we hear that someone's skinning ChatGPT to form an anxiety bot and they're using it themselves at times of suffering. Now, we can get evangelical about what we should do or that we shouldn't be allowing that or should this, should not that, like all the rest of it. The reality is that it's happening. I've been on Reddit and seen this a week ago. I just looked it up on Reddit. There are people doing this, like, and they are sharing them with people, and they're saying, "Here's my code," and this horse has fully bolted. With you being not only a clinician but obviously a regulatory expert, and you have a view of what needs to happen. You do know what should happen. You do know what good and great and safe looks like. How do you feel about what's going on right now? Like, what you can't. I don't feel like we can put this genie back in the bottle. Like, can we? Is there a layer that needs to be put in? Where does it go in? Do we need to? Does Sam Altman need to just have like a crisis of conscience and do something to like stop it saying healthcare stuff? Or actually, do we embrace this? Like, what on earth is your opinion on this as someone that's far more knowledgeable on it than me?
I think it's really exciting, and I think it's fantastic to see people experimenting with technologies. And just to be clear, if you make a chatbot which you use yourself, that's not a regulated medical device.
Yeah, right. This is the thing.
You're not putting it on market. You're not selling it to anyone. If you want to make a profit out of it or give it away for free with the claim that it will definitely cure a disease or condition, injury or disability, then you become a medical device. So, there are people, vibe coding their way into healthcare medical device space. But look, if we go back to the apothecaries selling snake oil from their wheelbarrows, right? It's kind of the same thing. Anyone could make a drug if they wanted to, and people do. They make up compounds. I've seen people using ChatGPT to formulate their own supplements, and then they order all the powders and mix them together in a capsule and take the supplements. I mean, you can't stop the individual person. That's their right to do whatever they want with their own body. It's when you start selling it and making claims that the regulators will step in. And I think this will self-police and limit itself to a certain extent, in that if you wanted to go and use someone else's therapy chatbot, you were more likely to use someone else's that had regulatory clearance than didn't.
That's fair.
Because there's an element of trust in that. And certainly no clinician should be prescribing an unregulated device, because that's not right, not legal either. So I think it will kind of self-police and self-limit to an extent. And I think going back to the future that we just imagined together about a mature, highly regulated, highly autonomous healthcare system, once that actually gets up and running and has been built, people won't need to build their own chatbots and AI systems anymore. These people are building toys. Some of them will get the funding and have the maturity to take them through to be actual useful products. But I think as long as people are clear that there's a line that can be drawn, and they're not crossing that line in terms of selling and over promoting something that should be a regulated medical device, I'm perfectly comfortable with it, and I think it's fantastic to see.
Interesting. So right now, if someone does want to figure out, okay, I wonder if this person has got this device regulated, or let's say someone is suffering with something at home, some form of anxiety, depression, and they want something. One of the challenges is that it's incredibly difficult to know. And bearing in mind, I'm in the space. It's incredibly difficult to know what's around, what's good, what's bad, but crucially, what's regulated or not. I can remember when I first started, when I ran the second accelerator, HS Ventures, I was, I mean, first time entrepreneur at that point, or at least trying to be, and God, the uncertainty around how much you're getting paid that month, or whether you're getting investment that can give you an extra 6 months, right? Like a lot was like piling on, and I used Wobot to talk to, and it was amazing. I had no idea whether it at the time whether it was regulated or I just knew that it worked, and so actually that was fine. And also I just got a signal from the market that was the best one because it was high up on the App Store and people were using it. There was reviews, so it was kind of policing itself at that point. Now is a completely different story. You will find hundreds of them at all places. How on earth can we cut through this? Like this is a problem. This is a problem right now.
It is. So this is about transparency and clarity. And I think there are three players who are involved. First of all, it's the person who makes the product themselves. So whether you're a solo developer or a company, a Healthtech company, you need to be transparent about what regulatory status you have. And that needs to include several factors, like do you have the CE mark, or is it FDA approved? Is it UK CE mark? Which jurisdictions is it legally allowed to be sold and used in? What is the intended use? So the intended use, for those who aren't aware, is a very short description in regulatory terms of what the limitations of the device are. So you have to be quite specific in an intended use. This device is intended to treat insomnia in adults who have tried other therapies and they haven't worked, for instance. So that's your intended use. So you have to be quite specific. And then the third thing is the evidence around it. So what evidence do you have to back up your claims? Now, when someone goes for regulatory approval, they will get their CE mark or FDA clearance, and that is on a database somewhere. But it's quite hard to find, and lay users don't use regulatory databases in their day-to-day lives unless they're incredibly bad. So that's one thing. The second thing is the intended use. People don't tend to make it public. Like their marketing often is wildly different to what they told the regulators, which is again illegal, and the regulators can fine you and pick you up on it.
Just to jump in on that, Hugh, I've even found this when I talked to a lot of people about becoming a SomX client, right? And I think since the very first time you and I spoke or did a podcast, you were very clear with me. You got to ask people for their intended use statement. You would have no idea how many people that has put off from working with us because I've asked that question, and all of a sudden I don't hear back from them. It's crazy, and that's a little bit scary.
It is. Imagine going to the pharmacy and picking up a packet of drugs. It doesn't tell you what the drug's for. I mean, it's insane.
It's
like, tell me what the drug does. It doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't advertise your intended use, but for some reason, it's kind of like the baseline for the sector. Is that
it feels to me like on some level, the owners of these companies, the developers of these technologies, etc., they must genuinely believe that the application of this, in order to make the impact that they want, goes beyond what is in the intended use statement, and they want to market it as such. That's what I can sort of fairly conclude, if I'm not suspecting anything malicious, right? That must be the case. And I think in part, maybe, like, I can definitely believe that as well in all the work that's gone into it, the market that they're going to need, the market size that they're going to need, the addressable market, as you say, like it's going to collar them if they're incredibly specific about what the exact intended use statement is. However, you have to be incredibly specific about what your intended use statement is, because that is the use that's been signed off that's safe and legal. And but remarkable how many people have ghosted us after we've said, just send over your intended use statement and we'll move to contract. Like,
and if people aren't prepared to put down in writing what their product does, then either they don't know what their product does, or they want to be hyperbolic about it in public. And you see this play out again and again. Theranos is the most classic example of complete hyperbole over intended claims of a device. Obviously, a regulated device, something that can take one drop of blood and tell you what all your analytes show. Clearly a medical device. They never got FDA clearance. And I doubt any of the investors at the time asked them about that. But we are digressing from the point. But the point is, just to go back to it, is that intended use is integral to everything. And if you can't be articulate and transparent about your intended use, then it's going to be really difficult to get regulatory approval. It's actually quite difficult to sell to people who are looking for a specific solution to a problem. So I think being transparent about the intended use is important. And to go back to the idea of databases, so the FDA, they have several databases, one for each of the regulatory pathways that you can get FDA authorization through. And they produce a 3-4 page summary letter per device, which has the intended use in it. And so you can actually download the intended use. Europe has a database called Udimed, which is incredibly slow and clunky, and it's not mandatory to put your intended use on the database, though it will become mandatory, I believe, by next summer, so people will have to start bidding in. The MHRA database for the UK is appalling. Like, you can't even find the name of the device. So you can only find the manufacturer and the generic type of device it might be, which is often just called like something like patient-facing software, which is almost completely useless to describe these products out there. So what we're doing at Hardian is we're trying to at least address this problem in part by building a unified global regulatory database. So you can look up any product either by the manufacturer name or the device name, or if you have the unique identifier number, you can search by that. And so what we do is, if the device happens to be registered in America and Europe, let's say, it will drag across information from the American documentation, and then you can actually read what it's intended to do in Europe if the unique identifier matches. And so we're trying to kind of create almost like the British National Formulary, the BNF, which is for drugs. We're trying to create that for medical devices. And we've got over 8 million medical devices in the database at the moment. We're doing the hard work of mapping them all and making that as transparent as possible. It's completely free of charge for people who want to do single searches. And the database is called HARRY. It stands for Hardian Regulatory Intelligence. And it's in beta mode. We've got funding from the government as part of one of the UK's Centres for Excellence for Regulatory Science Innovation. And we will be doing a full launch early 2026 to the world. So hopefully this will help address in part the transparency problem. So to go back to your question of where do I find regulated devices, we hope that this will be at least one of the good places that you can go and find out all the information that you need, including the risk class of the device, the intended use. We're also including other information such as any adverse events that have been reported and any literature. So we also scrape PubMed and other literature databases. So if your device has been mentioned by name in a peer-reviewed paper, you can see the clinical evidence attached to it as well. And we think this will help, hopefully, a rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. So hopefully it will help mature the sector a bit. And I think what we want to be able to offer to companies eventually is that they'll be able to log in and update. So when people search for their device, they can see a logo, they can see a brochure, they can see a video about it, all that kind of thing. And they can also then search for their competitors, and you can use that for some post-market surveillance. So let's say you are a therapy chatbot, you might want to keep a safe search open for all the other therapy chatbots on market, so you know who gets what clearance, who gets pulled off market, who has an adverse event, who publishes a paper, and you can get email that every week. So that's what we're kind of building out as well as a service. We'd also like to be able to offer it to hospitals who want to acquire software and AI systems. If we imagine a future where a hospital has 1,000 algorithms, all from different suppliers, you're going to need a database to manage all that software and figure out who's had adverse events and who's got new risk classifications and all sorts of things. So that's the transparency that I'm imagining that the future can be like. So that's what we started building, and we hope people will get excited about it and start to use it. Like I said, it's completely free of charge at the moment for single searches. So do try it out. The web address is harry.hardianhealth.com.
Awesome. My question, so where my mind went initially was actually to the what it does for confidence in the buyer journey as well. And actually, us being in a world where now, I ask for an intended use statement, people run away. That's not everyone, obviously. We have clients that can provide their intended use statement, and we happily work with them. But clearly, in a world where, quite rightly, there's a lot more transparency, someone's able to look things up. I mean, heck, they could even identify where their gap is and reverse engineer that and go like, what exists in this area, and look at a list of providers that they can then procure and pick from through whatever their system would be. It seems that it just helps to kind of unite the. So you point about maturing, right? It's just a much more mature way of doing things, that actually there are people that are differentiated in these different ways, but actually on the face of it, they're intended. These 6 things have the same intended use. So actually they're worth interviewing if you're a hospital or a buyer in some format, and actually you can then split hairs on the way that they do things or whatever is going to actually work for you. It seems that buyer confidence goes up enormously when people can just find that information rather than actually spend resource trying to get that information, or to try and critically appraise and do that analysis themselves, because that is also a cost. That is also a barrier to adoption. The fact that you have to have someone at the helm that can genuinely critically appraise, or they need to go to a consultancy to get like the technical due diligence and the regulatory due diligence and this due diligence and that due diligence. Whereas actually, in a world where all of this is far more transparent, it really increases that buyer journey and adoption potential. I imagine absolutely. You agree.
Look how drugs are procured by hospitals.
Well, this is
there's a product information management system, a PIM, an NHS PIM. With all of the listed drugs, and in fact, it's not just drugs. It's got rubber gloves and scalpels and all sorts of things. All devices they've been through some check. They're on a procurement framework. They're in there. They're regulated. All of their information is available to any hospital who wants to look them up. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about for the software and AI sector as well. These infrastructures are just common sense. They've been built before. They're not particularly sexy, but they get you that buyer trust. And hospitals have been really slow to procure AI because at the moment they're being inundated by individual companies, all making various different claims, all at various different stages of regulatory approval or transparency. And I think, going back to the maturity argument, if the sector matures, it rises the tide for all the boats in the harbour. Like, imagine if there was a very clear, transparent platform through which you can put your product information, which every hospital can then compare you to other products available on the market, with clear pricing, clear intended use, clear links to your evidence and everything like that. I think that really helps with the maturity of the market, and it will help increase sales and actually hopefully make that sales process infinitely less painful than it currently is.
It's another example of how regulation done right as a whole can actually boost innovation, because obviously it gets a bad rep. And actually, when you do just increase transparency and create the opportunity for innovation to happen safely, people can have more confidence rather than less, especially when they haven't had to go searching for all of this. You're drawing a lot of comparisons to the pharma sector and drugs, so drugs versus devices. Is that how this idea came to you? Like, is this broadly the framework that you're looking at the world of health tech and devices now through, and particularly software? Are you kind of going, well, what doesn't exist in software that does exist in drugs? That is the infrastructure. That is the future. Is that a fair framework for should other entrepreneurs be looking at this and going, well, if that's potentially the future, maybe we could fit in here? Like, that strikes me as a potential option for people.
I wouldn't say I've taken it as like my starting point. I mean, to be honest, we started building the database as an internal tool because as
right.
Concerned, so we need to keep up to date with who's got what clearance. And, before we were having to search 15 different databases just to find the answer. Now we just do it in one click. So we just, one day I kind of thought, well, why don't we just surface this externally? And then the use cases started becoming apparent. And then I started going, well, actually, this is kind of like a BNF. This is a formulary for medical devices. And then I started making the comparison to the pharma industry. Though that said, I have said for a very long time, algorithms are the new drugs, by which I mean that, people will be making algorithms or AI systems and then selling them as products within the healthcare system, just as drugs are. And just like drugs, they need regulatory clearance, they need clinical evidence, and they need that level of maturity around them to engender that trust. So I think you're right to pick up that I'm making those comparisons, but I wouldn't put it down to the fact that I've completely taken inspiration from the pharma industry and then decided to build this. It was built more out of an internal need that proved to be incredibly useful and has further use cases that just so happen to mirror the way that the pharma industry has set itself up. I think it's also worth making the point, though, that the pharma industry itself is not a perfect industry by any means. I'm not saying it is.
Many would agree.
But it does work. We have fantastic drugs. Look, my wife is a pharmacist, which is maybe why I know so much about the pharmaceutical industry, because we talk about it all the time. And she doesn't deal necessarily in the regulatory. Sorry, I can't speak. She doesn't deal necessarily with the regulatory side of things. But as a pharmacist in a hospital, she absolutely has to check the intended use of the drugs, the correct doses that has been tested. Everything, the way that you store that drug, the temperature it has to be at, the amounts you have to give, all of that kind of stuff. So that kind of product information is much more available for drugs. And then when I make the comparisons to what I do in the AI sector, I'm just thinking, well, why aren't we doing the same thing? Because if we had that information, that would just benefit everybody.
Do you know what made it really real then for me? And I'm sure the clinicians that will be listening, you wouldn't just arbitrarily give a drug at a dose that you thought might work, or you would go to the BNF where you know where things are and you would look it up. In the same way that if you've got all these algorithms as potential, if you've got all of this stuff as potential, you've got a patient, or even just go super realistic, you just got a patient list. You've done a medical ward round, you've got a patient list, you've been asked to go and either get some insights or take some actions or whatever. You've got now tools at your disposal that aren't devices. It's not stethoscopes and an echo and an x-ray. It's just a load of algorithms that can point you to that answer. That just made it really real for me that actually, or drugs that could, be towards that treatment or whatever. Like now you've got algorithms that can go and do that. That just made it very real to me that actually, of course, what you would do is you would go to a list, you would find the intended use, you would check it's relevant to your patient or exactly how to use it, because that's probably how things develop from here, right? Is that there will be a so for people in this age range, same that we do now for pediatrics, it's this dose, for adults it's this dose. Actually, why not with the algorithms too? Like for pediatrics you do this, and for adults you do this, or for this demographic of people, or this subset of whatever it is. I think that just made it very real of like, oh, hold on a minute, no, I actually do understand this world that you're pointing to now, which makes a lot more sense. My next question though is that actually, so you're someone familiar with an economic model, given that's a large part of what you do at Hardian. This is not, it's not cheap to do 8 million entries manually and get all that stuff, how much you're scraping versus entering literally manually yourself. But is this in part revenue generating? Is there a profit model or incentive behind this? Are there potential models that show themselves later? How do you think about this? Because I imagine there's quite a lot of people that will have an idea that's super valuable for the space, that you might be able to chalk this up to, well, basically everyone's just going to funnel through Hardian and I'll obviously pick up clients and all the rest of it through that. But actually, you'd also don't want to gatekeep it, so you want to keep it like potentially free for people, or at least some people. But similarly, if it's going to be continually worked on and improved, it needs to be generating revenue in some way. So how are you thinking about that as a product, a tech SaaS potentially product within a consultancy? Like that's quite an interesting one. Yeah,
and it is a new one, and to be honest, we are mandated by the CERSI, the Centre of Excellence for Regulatory Science Innovation, to come up with a sustainability plan
Oh,
the end of the
interesting.
green period. So we are looking at this. So my basic principle is that I do want it to be as far as possible free at the point of use for individuals out there
Yeah.
who just want to look up a device or two.
Yeah.
And I think that's the morally right thing to do. So that's what we're aiming to do. And it is currently free while it's in beta mode, and I think it will remain free for what I call single searches. So if you want to look up Acme Limited and look at all their devices, then you can do so for free. I think where we would have to start a subscription model would be somewhere like if you are, let's say you're a manufacturer and you want to upload your own information, we would obviously then have to vet that in some way. So that would obviously have a resource burden. So you might have to pay some subscription. But in return, what you can get is deep insights. You can find out how many people are searching for your device, where in the world they're searching for your device from, who's looking at your competitors. You can find out everything about your competitors that's on the database with live updates. You can set an email alert cadence, or maybe have a dashboard. I don't know. We haven't built that
nice.
yet. So there might be some kind of subscription, but it wouldn't be massively expensive. And then the other one is for the buyers as well. So let's say you're an NHS trust. As I said earlier, you have hundreds of software medical devices running in your system. You might subscribe so that you have an alert system for field safety notices from the MHRA, adverse event reporting, new publications related to data regarding the devices that you've got. So I think there are business models to be explored. But my hope is to make this as cost effective as possible and generally offer real value to people who get on board with this kind of system.
I hear you. That makes a lot of sense, actually, because it sort of remains free when the number one priority is safety on a short time horizon. Then it remains free. So as you say, free at the point of use for an individual in a situation that just wants to know the answer to something. That's completely fair. But actually, where it then contributes to commercial enterprise value, then actually it makes sense to monetize it there, because then you don't have to compromise on the safety for the individual element, which is really nice. You could run like training sessions, couldn't you, like for buyers of this technology, especially places like the NHS, the public sector, like people that just wouldn't know where to start potentially in either critically appraising or figuring out something, or even just that kind of binary, can we buy it? Does it do what it says on the tin? It sort of changes like the education side of things as well.
Absolutely, and we want this to be filled with even more information. So, like I said, I think if the manufacturers themselves could have a login to upload more information, like a brochure, a link to their website, a link to their instructions for use, which have to be digital these days, and I think this is really important to think under the context as well of the European AI Act, which actually demands this kind of level of transparency around high-risk AI devices, of which AI medical devices count as high risk. So I think it's going to be really important to have this kind of transparent, open data available. And just to add that currently you saw in the demo there, we cover America, Europe, and the UK. We are currently going to be incorporating, very soon going to be incorporating the Australian, Canadian, hopefully Brazilian databases as well. And South Africa has just joined what's called the Medical Device Single Order Program. So hopefully they'll be joining and have the database as well. So we're trying to make this as global as possible. So anybody in the world can find the device.
Wow.
The exciting thing is that as the world globalizes, people are talking about international reliance on regulatory authorizations. And what that means is you could get a CE mark in Europe, but then you could take that, and if you go to a country which accepts the CE mark, maybe, I don't know, South Africa, for instance, Australia, you could then use the same data, port it straight across, and that would help with your authorization in a different country, because all the data would be streamlined, linked to that unique device identifier. So there's other ancillary benefits as well that I can see, but we need to build out the basics and build out the framework first. So, and just to remind listeners, this is all in beta. It's free to use for now. Do play with it. Do give us feedback. There's a feedback button on the website itself.
Wow. You mentioned Brazil. Is there a lot of health tech that goes on in Brazil? A lot of software, a lot of devices?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they love it over there. They do, and they tend to, because it's part of the MDSAP, which is the Medical Device Single Audit Program. If you get your QMS certified under MDSAP, it means that you can take products from America, Japan, Canada, and into Brazil. So it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, they're well ahead of the curve compared to
that makes some sense, because we get, I mean, it's like 5% of listeners that we have in Brazil or something. It's just like seemed like quite a random place to just have a load of listeners to a Healthtech podcast, but seemingly a lot of hello to everyone that's listening from Brazil, basically. So,
indeed. In fact, we have a Portuguese member of staff, so that's incredibly useful for us.
One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, in fact, here's a good example that I can quote at you. So Dartmouth did a study where they trained a model to do, it was a chatbot called Therabot, and they used it in a research environment on people with high risk for depressive disorder, or they were high risk in some way for depression. They were high risk for eating disorders. It seemed like a wild place to use an anxiety depression chatbot. It seemed very odd. However, they did an RCT, and it's a very reputable place, and it worked. So again, horses bolted. People are going to see this and they're going to go, well, I'll just vibe code my own thing. We just talked about the whole Reddit stuff. Entrepreneurs, though, are also going to see this, as well as the patients. Entrepreneurs are going to go, well, and I use entrepreneurs quite broadly there. Like, basically, if you're around about 20 years old, you might just have an idea that, hey, I could just do this and sell it. Like, probably a lot of people have got that idea currently. But clearly, to sell it, it will need regulating. How would you practically actually get something like this regulated? Is it possible?
The answer is it's absolutely entirely possible. And look, vibe coding, even though I hate the term because I think it just sounds so sort of, it reminds me of kind of like the Bill and Ted kind of surfer kind of speak, you know? Vibe coding, dude. But look, I have vibe coded, inverted commas. My Python is incredibly rusty, and I do use it now and again to, but I use it in a way that I know what I want to achieve, and I'm only asking it a very specific kind of thing.
Yes.
So how could you get a vibe coded product regulated? So the answer is, if the product is entirely vibe coded, you won't be able to get it regulated. What you can do, and this is completely allowable, and in fact is good software development practice, is you can vibe code to iterate your first kind of prototype, your minimally viable kind of prototype version of what you want to build. You are absolutely, I would encourage you to do that. Vibe code away, get onto ChatGPT or whatever your preferred solution is, and start to build something that you can hack together and works. And you can use that to do things like formative usability, which is part of the regulatory process. So you can say, look, does a chatbot or whatever it is that you've built actually provide some kind of usable interface that can achieve certain outcome? You could use it for that. As soon as you find features that actually work, and you've come to a sort of semi-finished idea of the shape of what the software product is going to look, then you would then have to break that down into software requirements, and then you would have to build that out with using proper software development processes, then verify and validate that you've met the requirements that you set out. So the vibe coding can be used as that kind of starting point, that idea generation, that experimental phase. It can be used for formative usability, and it can be used as kind of showing a proof of concept. That's absolutely allowed. It's the point at which you want to nail down and absolutely sort of finalize features that you have to then write down the requirements for those features and document them in their appropriate regulatory fashion. Once the product is finished, you then go and do what someone like Therabot did in Dartmouth. You go and get ethics approval to run a study. If the study is for the purposes of investigating the performance of a non-regulated device, you have to apply to the MHRA for a notice of no objection to do that kind of study on a non-regulated device. But once that paperwork is done, you can then go do your studies, use that data, write it up into a clinical evaluation report, and then submit to a regulatory body to go and get your CMOC. So it's entirely possible. You could even partly vibe code a class 3 AI device, dare I say it. So hopefully this inspires some of you out there to actually get out there and do it.
So you're really not like the innovation police. Like, you're really not the, I don't know, like, you hear a lot of things, man. Like, like, oh, this is like Hugh Harvey had blah 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 blah. Like you get a lot of that. Whereas actually, no, you can be pro this. You just got to follow the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I love like innovation, and I'm really excited about AI in medicine and people coming up with new ideas. My job is to make sure that those ideas come to market safely, right? The benefits outweigh the risks, and that you've documented things according to what the law mandates that you do. That's all it is. Okay, so I kind of bring the boring aspects along with the fun that my clients bring. And I'm happy with that. If you embrace the boring, embrace the technical challenge, you can achieve remarkable things. Let's go back to what we started with, is class 3 approval. There's no reason why there shouldn't be hundreds of other class 3 devices, and they've all got to start somewhere.
So one of the things that I want to ask you about before I let you go is you built a business around this stuff. You built a business around regulation of devices. We moved into software as medical device. Your market size increases, although obviously we've done that a little bit by the time you've moved in. But you built a consultancy. Now, there's a lot of listeners that are potentially doing consultancy, building a consultancy. I think it's really interesting how you and I both, in fact, we liked health tech and we saw the opportunity that currently healthcare has very little technology in it. And well, it does actually. It actually did have quite a lot. It was just legacy tech and old tech, and there was a lot of new stuff coming through. And I guess in some way, because you and I have talked about this before, that we spotted where we thought the world was going to go, that there's going to be a health tech industry. And so there's going to be a marketing for health tech. There's going to be an HR for health tech. There's going to be a regulation for health tech. And so we built our businesses in that kind of services layer, in that layer that helps all of the businesses. And that is a completely viable model. We haven't raised VC money. We're not on the clock. We're profitable. We build things differently. We own the vast majority of our companies as well as our employees. And it's a different model. And I guess my first question is like, do you feel like a health tech entrepreneur, or do you feel like a different type of entrepreneur? Because I definitely have an answer for that. And how's it going?
That's a really good question, actually. And thank you for the compliments there as well. And well done on your business too, I might add. Do I feel like a health tech entrepreneur? No, my personal risk threshold is actually relatively low, which is why I have worked in well-funded startups before. I've been in that sort of very move fast, break things environment. My risk appetite is lower than that, and I think that's why consultancy suits me. Do I feel like an entrepreneur? I mean, I guess by the strict definition, yes. I am leveraging other people's expertise within my business. I am by no means the most technically proficient at the regulatory or the health economics or the clinical evidence. I'm more the steerer of the ship, as it were. So I guess in that essence, I'm an entrepreneur. I just like to think that when it comes down to it, I am in the same side of the pitch as the health tech entrepreneurs. I want them to score goals. I am more like the person painting the lines on the pitch rather than playing the sport. You see what I mean? You know, kick the ball within this bit here.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm very, very good at spotting when people go offside. So more like a referee, I suppose. More so than an entrepreneur. And look, I'm not in it for a massive exit, because consultancies do not exit for 10x multiples. We all know this. I'm in it because I really enjoy it. It suits my work ethos, and it really fits, as I said at the start of the interview, with the Japanese concept of ikigai. It's something that I'm good at, I'm interested in, I'm passionate about, and the world needs. So yeah, I guess, were we both right at some point a few years ago to set up businesses in this area? I think so far, yes. Though I would like to add one thing. My aim is that every single client who comes to Hardian needs us for a period of time, but that we provide them with such good services that they fully understand what they need to do to move forward, and they don't need us after a certain point in time. I think consultancies that try and snag you in and then keep you in forever, paying some monthly retainer, I think is not the right model. I would rather bring you in and over a period of just a few months on the project, wherever it takes, teach you to fish so that you can carry on for the rest of your career. And then by all means, come back to us if new questions come up or regulations change, that's fine. But it's more about taking people on that journey. And I've said this before, I see us more like driving instructors. So everyone who comes to us needs to learn to drive. And the reason you learn to drive is A, you need that license, but B, you want to personally feel safe as a driver. And that's exactly what I hope a lot of our clients come away with, is obviously they get their license, their CE mark or their FDA clearance, but they feel safe driving their health tech company in that regulatory environment, and they feel confident. And I think that's the really, really important part of it. So we will carry on doing it as long as people need us to do it. And just to say to anyone else listening, I have massive respect for James and his business. In fact, James's business does a lot of our media stuff as well. So we are interlinked and interrelated. And in fact, the reason you ask your clients for intended use is because you asked me once at the start to come to your business and come
literally
give a few pointers. And I remember talking about the intended use, and it's really reassuring to see that you guys take that seriously.
Well, it keeps us out of trouble, and I think this is the thing though, because there's a lot of I know there's a lot of businesses that take that business because they go from that new business scenario into another. But it comes to a point that I was going to mention, which is that I think when you set up a consultancy or an agency or something similar to us, we spend less than we earn each month, and we take some of that home and spend some of that trying to do something in the space. That's broadly what our model is. Some people take all of the profit. People like you and I will put a lot of that profit back in to try and actually solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think that's what separates us compared to some others, which is that we're in this to solve a problem because we came from this world. Like the problem that I had 15 years ago as a clinician, trying to just get some technology into my ward so that my life just got a bit easier. I haven't lost that desire to see the health tech company score. Like I haven't lost that. Like that remains with me. And so any time that we make that happen, we still get the kick out of it. Like that has never left. That's never left me. It's never left us. And I think that ironically, when you spend your margin down to do the amount of events that we do, to go to all the places that we go to speak to all the people that we speak to create all the content that we create, like I'm sure like if you did a genuine economic analysis of all the experiments that we run that fail in order to get messages out, people would just be like, come on, mate, like at least pocket, a bit more of the margin yourself and like give yourself a bit more security, and that'll give you there's definitely arguments around that. But I think when you actually do set out to solve the problem, it's actually palpable in the market. Like people will genuinely know and feel like they don't need to be here doing this. Like they don't need to be doing that. Like you could have, as I say, building a platform that makes things searchable in order to increase the safety of a space based on what regulatory approval they've got via a search engine functionality, that is not cheap. That is not cheap. That's 5-6 figures, like easy to build that, easy, without all of the stuff you're going to have to do on top, and actually without a clear revenue model off the back of it. It's like the irony is that these are the things that give us personal satisfaction, and they go and solve the problem in the industry, and then people can sense and feel like, okay, I want to be part of that. I want them to work for us, or us to work with them, or however they define it, because actually it's one of the benefits I think of being in health tech is that we are broadly all pulling in the same direction. Like we are all trying to just make healthcare better. And yes, there are some horses winning the race at some particular point, but actually we have more in common than what separates us, particularly in health tech. And in a world where There's a lot of M&A going on. There's a lot of like roll-ups and stuff like that. Actually, I think we can all be having these conversations a lot more of like, hold on a minute, there's a bigger goal here. But I think that's super interesting. And to your point around, what was I going to say here? I was going to say, remark this for editing. One of the things that I think you actually do well for your clients is what we said right at the start in jest, when we said about you calling people out publicly that aren't doing the right thing and deserve to be called out. I think that's a form of justice. That's a form of justice for those that have taken the time and the energy and spent the money to do things properly and right. I actually think it's an additional client service that you offer, is that you're just going to basically weed people out and tell them they're doing the wrong thing. Not like maliciously and not directly at competitors of your clients, because it frankly doesn't have that correlation. It's far more just whatever you've happened to have seen on your feed. But I think it is a form of justice, and I think it is a genuine benefit that you're adding to the people that are doing things right. It's like the vigilante work that you're doing, basically the unpaid vigilante work that you're doing, just catching the bad actors out in the space. I think it also is important. And whilst it has entertainment value, I actually think it has a lot of actual value to it. But you got to care. I think that's the thing for a successful consultancy, a successful agency. You got to care. That's my hunch anyway.
And look, if anyone takes anything away from this interview, I care absolutely deeply and passionately about this space. I was a radiologist, and the reason I got into AI, I remember because I was reporting MRI spines. So you're looking at multiple sequences of the spine. And obviously the spine, you have to count the vertebra. So you got T1 to 12 and L1 to 5. And you have to manually count them. And I was thinking, it'd be so easy to write a piece of software that just overlays on this and tells me which vertebra I'm looking at. And so, I did hack together something like that at the time. And then I thought, well, why don't I use it in a hospital? And the local PACS IT manager was like, well, where's the certification? Where's the cybersecurity? And I was like, oh, okay. What's that about medical? So I did what so many people have done out there. What a lot of our clients have done is accidentally built a medical device. I think what I did after that, as you say, is go, okay, I'm going to help people solve this problem. And I have built medical devices myself and brought them to market. I was involved with Europe's first CE mark for a deep learning based AI system. That broke new ground. I've done it myself. And many people on my team have been part of projects and actually got regulatory clearances themselves. And I think it's about learning from those experiences and giving back to the next generation of people who are coming up with the new fantastic ideas. And yeah, I do police it a little bit online, but I don't do it for the entertainment value. I do it to educate.
Yeah.
Lots of people are in denial about regulation, and I think all it takes is one nudge to say, actually, there are some regulations to think about here. And I think it's important that people realize that, and going back to the theme of the interview, become more mature about approaching this sector, because regulation is a moat. Again, look at Skin Analytics. There is not a single other company in the world who can claim what they claim. It is such a huge competitive moat, and they will absolutely succeed because of it. So take it seriously. If you need support, there are people like us available to help you, teach you. And otherwise, have fun out there and stay regulated.
I love it. Hugh, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, James.